The regular season is almost here when we have press conferences from Koby Altman and Kenny Atkinson. And media day is just around the corner in a few days as well. It's Spencer German. It's Spencer Davies. The Cavaliers season is getting ever closer, and we're getting excited. And we have some great stuff to talk about today, Spence, because on Tuesday, as we know, and as you know because you were there, Koby Altman and Kenny Atkinson talked for the first time. This is how they sort of set this up. Those two kind of get their own little session and then media days for all the players and everything. So we'll have tons of content coming for you here at the YouTube channel and, of course, over at our new website, roundtable.io/sports/NBA/Cavaliers. So make sure you stay in tune with everything because, like I said, a lot of stuff coming down the pike here as the season gets closer and closer. Spence, we'll get into a couple overarching things today from the press conference on Tuesday, but I just want to kind of get your overall thoughts on maybe some of the big things that stood out just in general, and then we can get more specific about certain things you want to get into, especially what I kind of felt like the overall theme was just sort of from listening at home, which was there was a lot of talk about this roster and how they felt they upgraded in a lot of places and they got better in a lot of places with the moves that they made, despite having, as we talked about throughout the offseason, limited resources to sort of work with.
Doubling down on internal growth. That was the theme from this one. And I feel like it's kind of repetitive from last year, but it makes sense because they are taking steps towards that goal of being a championship team. This is as concrete and as believable as I think they came across this year. Kenny Atkinson was not hesitant to talk about championship expectations. Koby Altman was not hesitant to talk about championship expectations. Sometimes they would dance around it, but I think that they know that this is the time to capitalize. And the thing is, too, multiple bites at the apple is the way that Koby called this, right? So it's not just about this year and taking advantage of the other injuries in the Eastern Conference. They felt like regardless of that happening, they would have this type of ascension over the next couple of years. It's going to be sustainable. It's going to be because of their core players who are an average age of 26.5 still between Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, and Donovan Mitchell. So that I feel like is the reason they have this belief in the team, in the organization going forward. That's my biggest takeaway. There's another couple things that I wanted to touch on. Darius Garland returning to basketball activities, not exactly
that was huge.
The high amount that you would think when you hear basketball activities. He's going to be limited. He's going to be very limited, actually, as Koby put. But the fact that he's already on his feet again has to be a good sign. Loved hearing about Donovan Mitchell and his attitude this offseason. Koby said that he's in mid-season form, quote unquote. So they actually have to even hold him back from working too hard right now because of the hunger in his eyes. And I'd call it starving, for one, because he is obviously hurting from what happened last year. Evan Mobley, this one's kind of obvious because they've been talking up a storm about this guy the whole year. But Evan Mobley wanting to be a top 5 player, really seeing it in his maturity and the way that he player-led workouts over in LA. He hosted a bunch of his teammates, got to know him even more, connected even more. So it's not just on the court, it's also the maturity level. It's the off the court communication, on the court communication that's getting better with him with age. And remember, he's still only 24 years old. So those were the things that I think stood out to me the most about this. There is one other thing that I want to get to later that maybe some people aren't really talking about, but I feel like those are the things that really kind of caught my eye.
All great things. I'm glad you bring up like the multiple bites at the apple part of this. I think, going back to the DeAndre Hunter trade back in February, I think that was a move that it felt like they were setting this up to be a multi-year thing because you knew you had multiple years of control of him. You were finally getting that wing sort of added into the mix here. But listen, even if that's the case, even if this is built to last, this year feels like an abnormally lucky, maybe not lucky, but an abnormally different maybe chance at winning the title because of the landscape of the East and how much it's changed. So not shying away from that, understanding what the expectations are. And I can guarantee you, we'll talk to Donovan on Monday and he'll have some quote sort of replicating what he said at the end of last season about how we could go 82-0 and nobody will care because he understands it too. Like this is an abnormal chance to sort of make a run at this thing this year, even if the team is built to, survive this several years into the future. And that's why I do think like the expectations are going to be even higher, because there is a lot of talk right now about going into the season, as we sort of alluded to when we talked about like the biggest threats to the Cavs, that the Cavs are maybe the team to beat in the East, or at least one of two teams to beat in the East, and that they should be able to, because they're a veteran team at this point, because they've been together for so long, because they have the star power, they should be able to come out and emerge from this conference. But obviously you still have to go out and do it. And then that's the big thing that obviously has to come together here. I did think some of the undertones of how much they emphasized like this roster upgrading, and I know Kenny talked about that a lot, and the moves that they made this offseason, and just different parts and pieces that they brought in. I think that's obviously highlighted, of course, by the Lonzo Ball move. And what's interesting about that, I mean, obviously on one hand, it's like, what's the coach going to say? He's not going to be like, yeah, we got worse this offseason. That would never be something that they say. But at the same time, the confidence that he has, and the, him talking through just the different types of ways he can use and deploy different guys in these lineups, I think is fascinating. We heard that last year when he got here, talking about making Evan more of a ball handler and things. But I do think it should make Cavs fans excited, because I understand there was some hesitation on like, well, hey, Ty Jerome was so important to this team last year. Can somebody like Lonzo fill those shoes? Can some of these other guys step up? And you talked about the developmental piece. Can they step up and fill some of those roles and provide some of those sparks that they need? But the way that I think the thing that should make people excited and give people confidence that follow this team is understanding it's like you should be able to trust Kenny Atkinson to get the right to deploy this thing the right way and get what he needs from all these different parts and pieces that we're talking about. That includes Lonzo. That includes Jalen Tyson in year 2. That includes maybe Proctor. Like there's going to be a lot of different parts and pieces, but the way Kenny just talks and glows about his lineups and how he kind of plans on deploying guys and different things that he can do and the versatility these lineups have, I think is what should get people excited and not be worried about a loss like Ty Jerome, and be excited about what's to come, other than the fact that obviously we know guys like Lonzo Ball have to stay healthy, and you got to get Darius back, and you got to get Max Strus back first. But I think there's a lot of that, and Kenny, I think, is the right coach to believe in that he'll be able to get the most out of this roster, because he just did it last year.
Kenny's a guru, man. He knows the game. He knows the combinations. He got a good feel for who plays well with who. He knows when to test. He knows when it's not time to mess around. I think that's really helpful for him. Something that we've talked about on this podcast that he addressed during the press conference too was just being on his feet in Cleveland and not being hair on fire coming over from France after coaching the national team, and then coming into a situation where the expectations were extremely high that he followed through on, by the way, in the regular season with 64 wins, and doing that in the first year of his head coaching tenure here in Cleveland. But to your point about Lonzo Ball and even Larry Nance Jr., Kenny is going to lean on these guys. They are veterans. They're going to almost be like coaches on the floor. Lonzo Ball, extremely high basketball IQ, terrific defensive ability. We've talked about this over and over on the podcast about his ability to see up the floor, get the ball moving, being the secondary passer, being the hockey assist guy. Larry Nance Jr., almost the same thing, just a little bit taller, a little bit more active on the interior, right? So in the paint, he'll be getting rebounds, he'll be tossing out. I'm sure he'll be getting deflections like crazy. Larry's also somebody that sets up guys well in dribble handoff situations, and he's going to get you offensive rebounds. He's obviously extended out to the 3-point line. So those guys, I think, really help because they can do stuff on each end of the floor, whereas maybe the guys on the way out with Ty Jerome and Isaac Okoro were really good on their respective ends of the floor. Ty Jerome offensively, Isaac Okoro defensively. There's a little bit more balance, I think, with Lonzo and Larry. Now, one area though that they're going to have issue with potentially, and that they have to keep an eye on, is the injury front, because we know the history with Larry Nance Jr. We know the history with Lonzo Ball. but it sounds like both of them are physically in great spots right now, and the team's really excited to have them aboard. And I think this is also a good opportunity to address a new roster addition that we haven't touched on yet here on Cavs Roundtable on Courtside with Cavs.
Yeah, we'll do that here in a second as well. I will say this on because I talked a lot about Lonzo, but I do think Larry Nance is without question we can call it an upgrade because listen, he's basically sort of replacing Tristan Thompson's role, right? And the difference is like Tristan wasn't really going to contribute much. He had that leadership part of it, right? Like he was the kind of the vocal guy off the bench, and that mattered, especially in the playoffs and things. You want that piece. But Larry gives you that, and he's a guy that you can play pretty regularly in games and feel like you get something from on the floor. And that's why, like, I love that addition this offseason. I understand why they're talking about him, especially as an upgrade, but Lonzo too. And for all the reasons you laid out about him as a ball handler. And I am excited, as I think many people should be, about how they sort of mix and match these guys, how they sort of make it fit. It's a puzzle. But Kenny, it's just the way he talks about basketball too that always gets me like revved up because he is such a basketball just savant, and you can tell he has such a passion for coaching that like when he came in last year, it's the way he gushed about Evan and how he's going to use him. You can tell like the wheels are spinning as he's talking. He wants to give us more, but he can't give us everything because he has to keep some things kind of secret before the season starts. But I think it is like the thing that people should be paying most attention to and monitoring in a regular season that like we talked on last episode. Many people are going to enter the season saying, it doesn't matter, until you get to the playoffs. But it will matter because getting those guys acclimated, getting those guys into the right roles, seeing how everything fits together is what the regular season is going to be about for Kenny Atkinson. And I think he'll certainly find the right recipe to do that. Also added to the mix, as you alluded to, Spence, is Thomas Bryant, who will have an interesting role with this team as well. What I find... Well, first of all, I'll tell the audience this. Funny enough, I called a couple of Thomas Bryant's games when he was in high school in Rochester, New York, before he transferred to a prep school where then he went into Indiana and then obviously went on to the NBA. So it's kind of funny that like there's this full circle thing now of like me calling some of his games, and now he's playing for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Sounded like he was like ready to go overseas because he didn't have a lot of offers or not really any interest, but the Cavs come calling, they add him to the roster. And what I love about this move, Spence, is for all the people that talk about not having some of that toughness in the playoffs. We saw firsthand last year that Thomas Bryant can bring some of that because he was a killer in that series against Cleveland last year. And so it's kind of like one of those, well, hey, if we can't beat him, we might as well sign him type things. And I like the mentality that he kind of brings to the table here as another rotational piece that Kenny Atkinson can deploy.
And it's a little bit of a different type of big man, too. So, he's 6'8", 6'9". He's not exactly tall, but it's someone that can compete with Dean Wade, per se, right?
Yeah.
To get those minutes in that third slot or, even try to figure out what Larry Nance Jr.'s role in this is, too, because they now have a little bit of a surplus there in the front court at the 4/5. What Thomas Bryant does well is he agitates. Yeah. He's not afraid to give you a hard foul, but also he's been extending out to the 3-point line over the last couple of years.
He made a 3 against the Cavs in that series, I'm pretty sure, if I remember, like late in a game. I can't remember which game it was, but I remember the 3-point shot.
And not to forget, too, against the New York Knicks in the Eastern Conference Finals, went 3 of 4 from beyond the arc in an elimination game. But against the Cavs, what it was the mid-rangers that would not stop falling. Those ones I remember like yesterday. That was a tough one because obviously Indiana came storming back in that game 5 and things went south pretty quickly for the Cavs. But for Thomas Bryant, I think this addition is good because it provides the depth. It gives you a little bit, like you said, a little bit of that toughness, a little bit of that grit that you're looking for. But it also provides you with a big man who is adapting to the modern game now. And I know he's a little bit undersized for the 5, but somebody break glass in case of emergency type of big, but also someone you can rely on too if someone else is hurt, which again, surplus of bigs is very important to have in this modern NBA or else teams will just pick you apart and attack you like crazy. So I really like the pickup. I think it's a solid third/fourth big to have, depending on how you look at Dean Wade and Larry Nance Jr. and seeing how Kenny Atkinson fits that. But as we know, Cavs always like to leave an open roster spot. So they'll have an open roster spot, and then they also have a two-way slot open as well. So we'll see where that goes. But TB, I like it. I like the pickup, and he's still, pretty much in the prime of his career.
I agree. I for all the reasons you said, I think it's a great addition. And your point on sort of an arsenal of bigs, I think is valid, because that was a complaint, or maybe not a complaint, but that was a flaw with this roster. I think the last couple of years was they just didn't have the surplus of bigs. I mentioned Tristan Thompson, like that was your guy off the bench if Evan couldn't play or Jarrett couldn't play. And yeah, like Kenny would get creative and sometimes put like Dean at the 5 and do some different things, but you don't ideally want him at the 5 for like extended periods of time, obviously. So yeah, like I think the more versatility you have, the more options you have there, the better. It was clearly something they recognized and said, we need more players there. And they took care of they took care of it by adding Larry Nance and now adding Thomas Bryant, who can play that big role for you in certain spurts and situations. Because like you said, he's not a true big in terms of like his size, like he's a little smaller, but he can still do some things there. And he comes out and shoots threes. And I do want to remind people too, that a guy like Brook Lopez, who, went from being just kind of a traditional big to then finding ways to space the floor because he could knock down threes. At the forefront of that was Kenny Atkinson. Kenny Atkinson was the guy who kind of turned him into a guy that could shoot threes. And so
Al Horford too.
Yeah, Al Horford as well. You're right. Exactly. And so that kind of intrigues me, the idea that maybe Kenny Atkinson gets his hands on Thomas Bryant and can help him do that even more, where he becomes a threat from anywhere on the floor on the offensive end. And then that's just another thing that you have in your holster.
Yep. Very broad shoulders too. You don't want him really putting it on the floor off of closeouts, like say an Evan Mobley or something like that, but
Right.
Somebody that can move bodies though. Someone that can move bodies on the block if you need him to. And he's going to get you those scrappy plays. He's going to get you some boards. And again, not afraid to use his fouls, not afraid to get in someone's face. And I think, as you said, if you look at the toughness element of the Cavs team that we keep going back to and will continue to until they win a championship, that is going to be something he brings to the table as well.
Yeah, and let's be honest, the thing that the fans should be most excited about with Thomas Bryant is that grittiness, the playoff mentality that he brings, because I know that's going to come up. That's going to come up at least 50 times throughout the season. There'll be some game that they lose, Spence, where they had a lead or something and they blow it, and they're going to be like, this team's just not tough. They were getting bullied in the fourth quarter, and someone's going to bring it up, and we're going to say, relax, it's okay. Hopefully they're in first place, and we can tout that. And then it'll be, listen, put up or shut up time will be in the playoffs. We know that. But this is the type of move that helps you that time of year, because the more guys you can add with that sort of mentality, that mindset, that physical nature that fans get so wrapped up in, I think the better. And hopefully that rubs off on other guys who now have had these calluses from all the playoff exit of recent history as well. So yeah, a lot of reasons to like Thomas Bryant, I think.
And another point too, yeah. Sorry, just to interrupt real quick. Being on a finals team, being coached in a finals environment. How about that? That's another thing that you can add to this pickup, is the experience and knowing what it's 100%. Like to be in such an environment.
Yeah. It's a series that also went, 7 games too. Like he knows what it's like to be in that competitive environment for the entirety of a series like that. It's exciting stuff. It is. And I think, in the theme of the roster being upgraded, this is another addition that I think makes a lot of sense for this Cavs team that we'll have to see how Kenny sort of uses it.
And not to confuse the audience too, Thomas doesn't play a ton of minutes, right? So last year in the regular season, he averaged 15. In the playoffs, I think he averaged under 10 minutes a game. But in spurts, when you play this guy for 4 to 5 minute stretches, he will give you good production. And that's what you should expect from him in this season when they do put him on the floor. He's not going to be giving you 20 minutes a night. He's going to be giving you probably like 12 minutes. And sometimes maybe he only gets like 6 minutes a game. But in those minutes, he's going to be productive. He's going to give you some good stuff.
For what it's worth, the team also signed Killian Hayes as a camp signee. So basically going to come work out with the team and see if he makes the roster eventually. But like you said, they like to keep that extra roster spot. Just real quick, Spence, what does a player like Killian bring to the table if he ends up making this team? Like, what can he sort of provide the Cavs?
Defense right away. Size at the point guard spot. I think his history with Kenny Atkinson working with Team France definitely plays into this. You get a trade from Long Island, the G League team of the Nets, bring him over to the Cleveland Charge. You get a training camp invite. I think also knowing that the Cavs won't have a full arsenal of point guards to be able to go during the preseason, probably bringing him in to be a training camp body to play him during the preseason, give him an opportunity to showcase probably towards the tail end and see where it goes from there. But Killian, I mean, top 7 pick 5 years ago, whatever it was, and just kind of flamed out. Unfortunately, never got the offensive part of his game going. Was kind of in that mode of not trying to take shots in the paint, not making shots on the outside when he was with the Pistons. So, the Cavs are in a spot where they can be this team that has a reclamation project like that, though. And what's nice about Killian is he's still like not even he's barely in his mid-20s. And that is something you can take a risk on, right? So that I think is, fine. It's fine to do something like that. I know that Chris Fedor also reported there were some other guys that played for the summer league team that'll be training camp invites. So this is Cleveland.com saying this. This is Norchad Omir, Tristan Enaruna, Jackson Robinson, and I can't think of the other one, but there were 4 other training camp invites that they are going to bring along next week.
Yeah, I agree with you too on the idea of somebody like Hayes being like a reclamation project that the Cavs have they kind of have the capacity to take on, right? Like honestly, like that's kind of what those training camp invite spots should be. It should be, hey, here's a guy that maybe never realized his full potential. Let's get him in here, see if he can do it with us, and maybe he makes this roster when we get to the point of the season starting, and then he can contribute for us. So I like the thought process there. I think it's good. Another thing that stood out to me from the press conference on Tuesday, Spence, was just Kenny Atkinson glowing about DeAndre Hunter and how much work he's put in this offseason, and wouldn't get into specifics of the starting 5 if that was in the cards for him or not just yet, which I understand. He's got to, again, keep some things close to the vest. But it does sound like he is really excited about deploying whatever year 2 of DeAndre Hunter is going to look like in the work that he's put in to get to this point. And this is what we always envisioned, right? When they traded for him, we understood last year when the playoffs rolled around, Kenny wanted to keep things kind of status quo. You had won 64 games. You had the best offense in basketball during the regular season. 121 was your rating, your offensive rating. Like it made sense why he kept things status quo. But like doing more with DeAndre Hunter and having more time now, because he got here in February. It was like he had a couple months and then it was the playoffs, right? He's had an off season. Now he's going to have a training camp with this team. Now he's going to have the preseason with this team, where then they can really figure out what's the best way to use him. And by default, he might just be in the starting lineup, as we've talked about, just because Max Strus isn't there. But like this is one of the players that I think is the must watch throughout, like leading up to the season and then once the season starts, because if he like reaches another level, if he becomes that next kind of guy in line to be a spark for this team, and he's not just a guy coming off the bench anymore, like I think the sky could be the limit for this team. Absolutely. If they have that type of wing player contributing on a regular basis, potentially as a starter in this lineup. So like, as you look for reasons why the regular season matters, following how DeAndre Hunter's used and what year 2 looks like with him is an absolute must watch, I think, for the Cavs this year.
Live reps, baby, live reps. And we've got a bookmark. We got to bookmark our last 2 episodes, 3 episodes, because we continue to sing the praises of one DeAndre Hunter.
Yeah.
Kenny Atkinson at his press conferences was talking about the first thing he wanted to do since he was just feet on the ground in Cleveland, not hair on fire, as I was mentioning earlier, was connect with DeAndre Hunter. Get to know him. Because as Koby Altman mentioned, DeAndre Hunter came to this team in the middle of one of their long winning streaks last year and was asked to do a lot for this team. And Kenny loved the way he played in the Miami series. He thought statistically he was awesome across the board. But getting to know him personally right now, apparently he's an introvert. Talking to him in the locker room, that's not that big of a surprise, the way he talks. But getting to know him on that level, and then it turns into tactical talk.
Yeah.
Okay, well, how are we going to use you? What spots do you like the ball? Where should I put you? Do you think that you'll look good in this area? Do you think this is comfortable for you? Having those conversations, and that's where they're starting. That's where Kenny Atkinson has started with DeAndre Hunter at this point, because both of them now have a little bit of comfortability.
Yeah.
They're not just trying to figure it out on the fly. And just that, even though they haven't revealed anything of how they're going to use him and all that stuff, I think gives them a good advantage going into season 2 with this team, because they have a little bit of continuity and they have a little bit of relaxation in a way, because you're comfortable in your environment. You're not always on the move. That's big time. That's huge for him. And I think that that's going to really pay dividends.
Yeah, I mean, this is the time of year to do those things too. I don't think people realize sometimes like the whirlwind that it is. Everyone's always like
the human element, man.
Everyone's always pushing the button at the in February of like, you got to make a trade, you got to make a trade, you got to make a trade to get this team over the hump. But I don't think they realize like sometimes that can be like the hardest time for a player to come in. You got basically 2 months left in the season. They're trying to get acclimated sometimes to a team that maybe already is good or is like just like on the fringe of maybe like being really good, and he's supposed to be like the missing piece or whatever. And so you don't like it. There's not a lot of time to just like sit down and like get to know somebody. You're game planning for the next game as you kind of go here. And you're just kind of like Kenny's always talked about just like spitballing things and trying things in game to see if it works. Like, so I appreciate the fact that he's now trying to get to know him on a personal level, and that he's had time to sort of do that. It all plays into, like we've talked about, the idea that Kenny now finally feels like he's like settled and can like really think clearly about everything he wants to do with this team. And I'll say this, I think DeAndre Hunter is maybe the most, how do I want to word this? Because listen, I under like Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley are the two stars in this team, and they're going to be the most important to this team, obviously competing for a championship. But
you use the word X factor.
What I think, yeah, maybe that's a good way to put it. What I'm trying to say basically is like, if DeAndre Hunter can be one of those two-way wings that transforms a team like we see around the NBA, like I'm not saying it's going to be Jason Tatum, but like Jason Tatum's that for the Celtics, right? Like everyone has their wing that kind of changes the way that they can play with all these teams. If he can become that, like I think he's if the Cavs are going to get over the hump, I think he's probably the next most important person in line behind Donovan and Evan. And I understand Darius is important too, and I understand him getting back healthy and being part of this is going to matter. But I think like he is even more important to them getting over that hump than maybe Darius is once you get to the playoffs. That's just my feeling on it. I just think it's so valuable to have that type of player, and what he brings to the table this year is going to be can take the Cavs to another level. Even if it's not record, 64 wins is hard to replicate. I'm not saying they're going to do that again, but just being even better than last year, I think a lot of it starts with how they use DeAndre Hunter and how much he's taking his game to another level, essentially.
One of my favorite moments of the press conference. Very well respected, very earned reputation of being one of the best to ever do it. Terry Pluto of Cleveland.com. He's asking about the small forward position. He's looking at Kenny. You're gonna figure this out, right? You're gonna fix this, right? Koby Altman interrupts, and he's like, I thought we did that with DeAndre Hunter at the deadline last year. So deadpan's over. They clearly think highly of this guy, man. Yeah. They clearly think highly of this guy, and it's awful what's happened to Max Strus, and hopefully he gets back and becomes a huge part of this team once again. Yeah. But I feel like this is an opportunity for DeAndre Hunter to claim that small forward spot and make it his own. I think that this is one of those things where it's going to work out really well, and he's going to really make his mark at the three. But I will say this: Kenny Atkinson doesn't really believe in the position thing. He was openly laughing at a media member during the press conference. He's like, "You guys and your positions and all that stuff." Like, so very modern basketball like approach. But Dre is going to be a huge part of this group.
Yeah, and listen, they'll need Max Strus too. I do think both him and Dre in the playoffs showed they have like an edge to them. Like they're not going to back down from anybody, which is again the thing Cavs need. I mean, I don't know if what I said is a hot take necessarily, but I just think he's third in line in terms of like most important to get this team over the hump in my estimation. So people can disagree with it. Maybe we can share that clip as our clip from this show. But I just, the reason I keep talking about him is because I think he's that important to the Cavs' success this year. Any final thought? We talked a little bit about DG and
yeah. Let's get real quick into
I was going to say
somebody.
when do you because they're going to slow play this, I think, obviously. But what do you sort of estimate is, especially knowing he's doing basketball activities on at least a limited basis, when do you sort of foresee him maybe playing again and being out there for this team?
Shoot.
December?
Maybe around Thanksgiving.
Okay.
If I had to guess.
Okay, so that's like three. It's like 3 weeks he'd miss, 3-4 weeks ish.
Yeah. So like initially, like what I was told last year was it was probably going to be around like 10 games. So yeah, that probably fits the bill. But
well, and I think Spence, like even if that's what they're hoping for, they don't need to rush him back. If 10 games becomes 15 games, if 15 games becomes 20 games, it's okay, because the big complaint right now with Darius Garland is that he's just not healthy at the end of the year or in the playoffs when they need him. And so if he has to miss 20 games, I'm just estimating here at the beginning of the season to make sure he's 100% right, that's okay, because the goal here is then he's healthy late in the season and he's ready for the playoffs, and we avoid this whole situation where people think he's a choker because he for whatever reason he's just had the worst luck ever when it comes to postseason. It's awful, but yeah.
It's definitely bad luck, and I will not hear it any other way. I'm gonna die on this hill. I will literally be on the top of this hill.
I'm with you on that.
But yeah, I think 20 games might be a little bit too much. Don't be too cautious on it. But I agree with you. You want to make sure he's healthy. You want to make sure that he's up to speed with conditioning. The first few weeks are gonna go probably not as well as expected, just because getting used to running on that toe again. You're used to the game speed, what Kenny Atkinson is asking of you on the ball, off the ball, defensively. It's a ton. It's a ton to happen really quickly. But you want that processing to happen, way before the playoffs. You want to be in a rhythm when you're going into April and May. So getting that under your belt is going to be really important.
How much do you think, though? How much do you think too early on, when he does get back, that he'll be sort of monitored in terms of like minutes and all that?
Probably.
Do you think that will be a thing? Okay.
Yeah. Probably minute restriction. I would assume somewhere around like 20 to 25. You know how these guys do this. And he's going to use his performance staff as usual, the way that he always has. And that stuff's going to also go for Lonzo Ball. It's going to go for Larry Nance Jr. These guys are going to keep an eye on everything. Donovan Mitchell's workload, they probably be less concerned about like an Evan Mobley per se, because they won't mind throwing him out there for 36 minutes a night probably, or something like that. But it's for the guards and for the veterans coming in, they're going to be super cautious. And then when Max Strus comes back, they're going to have restrictions on him. It's just the name of the game. It's normal. But if I could get to a couple more points before we wrap up, I see we're at 33 minutes or so. Talked about your boy JT, Jalen Tyson. Brought him up
Don't give too much away on JT, because I actually have a really good topic for our next episode, Spence.
Okay.
And I'm not saying don't talk about it. I'm just saying don't go too deep yet, because I know you love to go deep. So that phrasing. I meant you love to go deep when it comes to basketball. I'm glad I caught myself so I can make the joke. Anyway,
continue.
The topic that I want to get to is, because of how much Kobe continues to talk about internal development, I kind of want to throw around, like, who do you think on maybe the latter half of the roster needs to have the most internal development for this team this year, in terms of like playing a bigger role, whatever. I think Jalen's going to be in that conversation for sure, but I'd be, I'm curious to have us kind of toss that around a little bit. So we'll do that on our next episode, but I will let you have the floor to talk about Jalen for a little bit.
Okay. Got you. But with JT, just kind of brought him up out of nowhere and said, like, he has an inkling he's going to be a really big, important part of this group this season. And it's just because of his work ethic and how he's attacked the offseason and all that stuff. But the point I wanted to bring up that I have not brought up yet, whether it's social media or any of my articles, it's interesting to me. So when talking about this core and the internal growth, still refer to him as the core four, Koby Altman. Still refer to him as the core four, but only really goes on to talk about Donovan, Evan, Darius. Okay. Now, comes to Jarrett Allen's defense later in the press conference after someone asks about the toughness again, because this is the question we get every single year.
Yeah.
And immediately comes to his defense, talks about how brilliant it was in some level of toughness to play all 82. Kenny Atkinson says, not fair on the criticism to hold it to just one guy for that instance. And he's been the linchpin of the defense. So for me, it's a little bit of mixed signaling. They still use the word core four, but really only talk at length about the other three. And I'm not a crapster. You know me. I'm just trying to read the tea leaves here.
Yeah.
It sounds like they're I don't know. I don't want to go there, but
no, I get where you're headed though. I get the direction. And I will say, Spence, that to me feels like an extension of Kobe's remarks from the summer, like at the end of the season. Because I remember we talked about it, like he kind of avoided talking about Jarrett Allen until he was asked about it. Like he talked a lot about Evan. He talked a lot about Donovan. He talked a lot about Darius, but same exact thing. And then, when it was brought up, like, do you think you need to keep this group together, or, those types of questions, he kind of beat around the bush where it was like, yeah, we still view Jarrett as an important piece of this team. But he didn't praise Jarrett throughout most of the rest of the press conference like he did the other guys. So I get what you're saying here. It's not that you're predicting. By the way, you buried the lead because we should have probably started with this topic. But anyway, it's not that you're saying, hey, Jarrett's getting traded, and I want to be clear on that. But it does almost feel like they're giving this thing some time this year. And if it gets to a point where they're like, we got to change the math on this a little bit and change out some pieces and parts, that he would be the first piece they would consider moving on from that quote unquote core four. And I think that, but I think he already set the stage for that when he talked at the end of the season.
And also, now that I think about it, they're starting to bring in more bodies for the front court. Can you make that kind of conclusion too, or that assumption? And again, me, I'm not someone to create drama, but like I'm just kind of reading it here. I'm reading the situation, and it's just not the same as it's been in past years where they've gone out of their way to talk about
for sure
Jarrett. We knew that this would come to a crossroads with Evan Mobley and his development. We knew this would happen eventually. Well, but this might be the first time.
We talked a ton about, like, in an ideal world, you want Evan playing the 5 for not the whole game, but like a stretch of the game. And then what does that even do to Jarrett Allen? And if you have other bodies on this roster now that you can sort of supplement around Evan when he's not playing the 5, you can kind of make it work in a different way. Now, we know they're not just going to trade Jarrett like they're going to try to get value for him. So, but it does sound like they're kind of keeping that door open a crack on, like, hey, teams, if you're interested, like, and you give us the right offer, we might be willing to change some things around here if it gets to that point. I'm not saying it's going to happen before the season. It feels like more of like a let's reassess the trade deadline thing if things aren't going well. But if things are going well, he might finish out the season, and then maybe if they come up short again, next summer is the time when they actually trade Jarrett. But it's not shocking necessarily, because I do think that's where everyone's minds have been headed already, that he might be sort of I don't want to say weak link because that's not fair, but maybe the piece that doesn't fit as well around the other 3 guys that you kind of just have to change out. But we'll see. But I don't think you're wrong. It's our job to sort of read into some of these things, Spence, and I think you're doing that in a respectful and in the right way. And I think it's good that we're talking about it on the show. Like I said, I wish we would have led with
it. and I will add this, though. Kenny talked about like certain tweaks and stuff around some of the players and not having to reinvent the wheel. There's no reason to do that. All these wholesale changes. We did what we did. But in specific reference to Jarrett Allen, he said that he's looked at some film, and against 5 out, he's going to look at different ways to deploy Jarrett and make it a little bit easier for him on both ends against teams that spread it out and against teams that play 5 out. So keep an eye on that too as well. I don't know how that works, but Kenny's the guru. I'm not. So I'm here to sit and watch. But it is. I wouldn't be fair of me to say that they didn't talk about him at all. They did talk about him in the sense of deploying him against 5 out. So, but yeah, it's just the messaging is just a little different.
Yeah, I think it's a great thing you picked up on, and it's worth talking about, which is why we brought it to the show. And Spence, I would say this: we like having takes every now and then, and getting people excited about certain things or whatever, riled up about certain things. But we do try to do this show in a respectful way. Like, we're not going to go out here and bash Jarrett Allen or say anything stupid or like assume he's definitely getting traded or like just speculate on things without the knowledge of it. But like, yeah, it is our job to sort of, interpret these things. And I think that's now 2 times that we've seen Koby, talk about Jarrett in that way, where we can start to sort of, wonder what that means. That's all. So I think we're going about it the right way. And hopefully you guys believe that as well. Another great conversation with a lot to talk about. And there's more coming because on Monday, we obviously have media day. We'll talk to all the players, new and old, that are a part of this roster. The return of Larry Nance Jr., I'm sure he'll be somebody that people really want to talk to, being a Cleveland guy and all that as well. So a lot of good stuff to come. You're going to want to stay locked in, both over at roundtable.io/sports/NBA/Cavaliers, where you can read our written content, but also right here, for those of you watching at the YouTube channel here for Courtside with the Cavs and Cleveland Cavaliers Roundtable, because we're going to have all those press conferences and stuff we'll post up here as well. And then Spence and I, I'm sure, will have like a post-media availability conversation of some sort. That's another podcast episode for you. So a lot of good stuff to come. The season is just around the corner. So if you're already sick of Browns football, there will be Cavs basketball on the horizon here in no time. We appreciate you guys hanging out with us. Another episode in the books for Spencer Davies. I'm Spencer German. Thanks for listening to Courtside with the Cavs, and we'll talk to you guys again real soon.
Go Guards.